The BBC's bias scandal has exploded. It's on the news in every major country in the world, and the BBC has outright been exposed now as a tool of the left-wing political and media elite to push propaganda out on the airwaves funded by our tax-paying pounds. And now Trump has threatened to sue the BBC for $1 billion, enough to destroy the organisation if they don't apologise within just a few days. But the really important thing about this is the entire scandal threatens to take down the Labour government as a whole and to oust Starmer from his position as Prime Minister and change politics in the UK forever. And so in this video, I'm going to explain exactly how that might happen and what we should really all be focused on, because the bias within the BBC is only just the start. So as a very quick background, what is the bias all about? Well, The Telegraph released this internal dossier from the BBC which exposed loads of their bias. And it was in a load of different areas like Gaza and Palestine and woke and gender ideology and all sorts of things like that. But the most important thing for the purposes of this video is the BBC demonstrated huge degrees of bias against Trump directly. Now, again, most people are looking at this and thinking that it's really just about the Panorama documentary, where really you can see it right here. Panorama had spliced together two clips from separate parts of Trump's speech. This created the impression that Trump said something he did not, and in doing so, it materially misled viewers. The spliced together version, basically the BBC tried to make it look like Trump was actively calling for political violence and riots at the Capitol, when in reality he didn't, and it was impossible to make this kind of thing a mistake by accident. This was an intentional move by the BBC to try and change what Trump is saying to push their political agenda. But it goes on much longer than that. Of course, there was an incredibly negative Panorama documentary put out by the BBC which targeted Trump. This was right before the election in the US, but there was no similar documentary targeting Kamala Harris, showing that the BBC was biased. And this just goes on and on, as you can see. The BBC allowed misinformation to be pushed on their platforms, saying that basically Trump was calling for his political opponents to be assassinated when he just outright wasn't. Again, all of it highlighted here. You can have a pause and read through this if you want to see a little bit more, but it is just across the board. The BBC is without a doubt deeply, deeply institutionalized and biased against Donald Trump. That has now caused a massive scandal in the UK because the BBC is supposed to be this bastion of impartiality, and now all over the world people realise that it's all a lie and it's just a tool of the left-wing political and media elite to push their agenda. Now, obviously, Trump doesn't like this, in particular because so much of the bias that has been exposed in the BBC is distinctly anti-Trump, so he made a few reactions. At first, he was just tweeting about it, celebrating that the two top people at the BBC had been forced to resign and lost their jobs as a result of this, but then it got a little bit deeper. President Trump on Monday threatened to sue the BBC for $1 billion over a documentary that his lawyer claimed included malicious, disparaging edits to a speech Mr. Trump delivered on January the 6th, 2021. That legal threat came in a letter from Alejandro Brito, one of Trump's lawyers, to the BBC that was obtained by the New York Times. The letter demanded a full retraction of the documentary, an apology, and what his lawyers said would be payments that appropriately compensate President Trump for the harm caused. The letter said that if those demands aren't met, President Trump will be left with no alternative but to enforce his legal and equitable rights, all of which are expressly reserved and are not waived, including by filing legal action for no less than $1 billion in damages. It said that the lawsuit would be filed if the BBC had not taken action by this Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. In October of 2024, Trump filed a lawsuit claiming that CBS News over in America had edited a 60 Minutes interview with Kamala Harris, then the Democratic nominee for president, to make her answers look more sophisticated than they were. Paramount Global, the network's owner, agreed to pay Trump $16 million to settle the case in July. And this year, the president sued New York Times and three of its reporters for $15 billion for what he claimed were false and malicious stories about him that appeared in the newspaper, and he sued Penguin Random House, the publisher of a book written by two Times reporters. Now, that case was thrown out by the judges, and it is now being, pushed again and an appeal being made. But in short, Trump has done this before. He has sued news organizations for misinformation or for fake news targeting him, trying to interfere within the election in the past, and it worked against CBS. He made $16 million in profit, but more importantly, he got CBS to retract their documentary, to admit that they had made a mistake and had acted maliciously towards Trump, and they probably aren't going to do that again. It didn't work against the New York Times so far, but I really don't think that Trump is bluffing here. I really do think that if he doesn't get the reaction he wants from the BBC or the UK government, he is actually going to sue the BBC. What has the BBC said in response so far? Well, not much. The BBC chair, who is under a huge amount of flack from this whole scandal on its own, has said that he has apologised for the editing of the footage, but he rejected claims of systemic bias in the broadcaster's reporting. So he basically said, sorry for being biased with our reporting, but I reject vehemently the idea that we are biased in our reporting. He also said that the BBC was considering how to respond to Trump's legal threat, and a BBC spokesperson said the broadcaster would respond directly in due course. So far, we really don't know what the BBC is going to what they're going to do in response to this threat to sue, but it doesn't seem that they want to give much ground to Trump. They already, and have been over the last week or so, been running a little bit of damage control, stating that these are just isolated incidents and accidents more than anything else, and that they're not evidence of systemic bias, which of course we know to be a lie, but that's the line that the BBC is pushing. And of course, members of the Labour Party and the government have had to come out with their statements on this whole BBC bias scandal as well, starting off with then Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer has backed the BBC and insisted it was not corrupt or institutionally biased, despite the resignation of two top executives in a row over its news reporting. So this actually happened before the threat to sue, and Keir has come out fully in support of the BBC, saying that he is on the side of that obviously left-wing organisation, which is no surprise considering he is a left-wing Prime Minister. We've seen a few other Labour figures come out with similar sort of statements. Lisa Nandy was recently in Parliament speaking about this. She's the Culture Secretary. She just defended the BBC, saying that, again, it is not institutionally biased. Those are politically charged attacks. She thanked the now disgraced CEO and Director General of the BBC, and she stated that, yeah, there's probably some kind of fix needed here when the BBC renew their charter in about 2 years, I think, but there's no real details on what that is, and she is pretty firm. She's backing the BBC, and she doesn't want them to give in to Trump. Now, this creates a monumental problem for the Labour government, because really Starmer has utterly failed as Prime Minister over his first, year and a half in power, but he does have one great big shining success that I personally didn't expect, and I don't think many people expected. He's actually done incredibly well when it comes to foreign relations with the United States, and in particular with Donald Trump. And I'm not the only person who thinks this either. This is an article from The Spectator, the probably most prominent right-wing newspaper or media outlet in the United Kingdom, saying that Trump's tariffs are a Brexit win. Of course, they're attributing the success to Brexit, but these tariffs and this trade deal happened under Starmer, so I think it's fair enough to declare that this is a Starmer win as well. Britain has got its trade deal with the US. Of sorts, Donald Trump has awarded Britain no exemption from his tariffs during his trade war. Even so, he has let Britain off lightly by imposing tariffs of 10% on imports from Britain to the US, the lowest he imposed on any country along with Brazil. The EU, by contrast, has been imposed with a tariff of 20%. And actually, this doesn't tell the full story as well. The article does, but I'm not going to go through the whole thing, obviously. But actually, Britain got off even better than it seems just from that headline 10% figure. We really don't export a lot of goods to the United States, but one thing that we do export quite a lot of are Range Rovers, actually about 100,000 Range Rovers a year, and Trump saw that, and he actually gave us another exemption, which means we don't pay that 10% tariff on any cars exported to the United States until we sell 100,001 cars to the US. So basically, Range Rover can keep exporting their Range Rovers over to the United States without being impacted by these tariffs. So actually, the car industry in the UK is being protected a little bit by this as well. I think it's fair to say this is a win for Starmer. Of course, there are a number of other examples where Trump actually seems to really like Starmer. Donald Trump said Prime Minister Starmer has done a very good job thus far, and the pair have a very good relationship. Trump and the Labour leader have met on numerous occasions, including a visit by Keir to Trump Tower in New York during the presidential campaign. I get along with him well. I like him a lot. He's liberal, which is a bit different from me, but I think he's a very good person, and I think he's done a very good job thus far. He's represented his country in terms of philosophy. I may not agree with his philosophy, but I have a very good relationship with him. And one sort of masterstroke by Starmer, again, one of the only things he's done well, is he leveraged the fact that Trump actually loves Britain and just, our royal family and our heritage and our history to a really, really strong degree. And he used the fact that we have a royal family and he offered Trump a state visit, which was a massive success for the international relations between them. Starmer used his trip to the White House to present Trump with an invitation letter from King Charles. Keir said the president's last state visit in 2019 had been a tremendous success, and the invite for a second visit was truly historic and unprecedented. Speaking to reporters in the Oval Office after reading the letter, Trump said he accepted the invite and that it would be an honor to visit the fantastic country. He also added that King Charles was a beautiful man, a wonderful man. Trump is an Anglophile. He loves us deep down inside, and Keir has actually done a really, really good job in hijacking that for Britain's benefit. Again, I think it's the only thing that Keir has actually done well, but this threatens to destroy that relationship, or the only successful part of Keir Starmer's prime ministership so far, right? Now, there's already an ideological rift between Starmer and Trump, and that's why personally I've been so surprised at how well Starmer has managed to play this. On the free speech issue, well, the UK literally doesn't have free speech, and Trump in particular, but the US is an incredible proponent of the idea that free speech is essential to a liberal democracy, to a Western society. Trump's spoken a little about it in his own time, but whenever he's with Starmer and a reporter brings this issue up, Starmer's managing to deload it and to get it out of the conversation, and Trump sort of just lets it go. Compare that to someone like J.D. Vance, who's far more open and honest with his criticism of the UK and the Labour government, and he's, the most active and powerful vice president in at least my living memory, right? Far more impactful than Harris or Pence or Biden ever were. He is actively chastising the UK at every opportunity with regards to free speech, but Starmer has managed to play diplomacy very well and to keep Trump on side despite this massive disagreement. On immigration, on recognising Palestine as a country, on Ukraine and funding them, on energy policy and the green agenda. Starmer and Trump are literally at opposite ends of the political spectrum, but Starmer's managed to do very, very well and hold the relationship together. And again, this gets even more impressive when you take a look at what many members of the Labour Party, very important members, have said about Trump in the past. Take David Lammy, for instance, who was Foreign Secretary a couple of months ago. Now I think he's Deputy Prime Minister and Justice Secretary, but he has been on record attacking Trump numerous times. A 2019 tweet from Lammy is what's caused new embarrassment. Trump said there had been no president who had been treated so badly as he had. In response, Lammy said, 4 US presidents have been assassinated. Snowflake. That's not the kind of language to be expected of someone who will end up as Foreign Secretary. In 2018, Lammy called then President Trump a neo-Nazi sympathizing sociopath in an opinion piece for Time magazine. The article was published ahead of Trump's first visit to the UK, and Lammy publicly committed to be one of tens of thousands on the streets protesting against our government's capitulation to this tyrant in a toupee. For added measure, he called Trump a dangerous clown and a profound threat to the international order. No room for doubt there. So David Lammy, probably the second most powerful man in the country right now, Deputy Prime Minister, well, he has a long, long history of attacking Trump personally, and that's obviously going to create problems with that relationship. But again, so far, Starmer has managed to move around it. Take a look at something like Sadiq Khan, where we have another similar situation. They hate each other. Sadiq and Trump absolutely hate each other, and their rift goes back years. So Sadiq hits out at Trump over comments he made at the UN General Assembly. Sadiq said, I think President Trump has shown he is racist, sexist, misogynistic, and Islamophobic. When people say things, when people act in a certain way, when people behave in a certain way, you've got to believe them. This comes after Trump attacked London Mayor Sadiq during his recent state visit to the UK, when he dubbed Sadiq among the worst mayors in the world and claimed he asked for him not to be invited to the state dinner. It's not the first time the pair have locked horns. Their feud stretches back more than a decade, and you can see just how extensive and far this goes on here. So if this BBC bias scandal is the one thing that manages to tear this relationship apart, first of all, that's really rather impressive that the BBC have managed to undo the only successful aspect of the Labour government so far. But more importantly, that's going to hit you and it's going to hit me. What could be some of the problems that we face from this whole scandal, though? Well, the first thing is, of course, tariffs. Now, Trump's tariffs are really misunderstood by most people, but I personally have a very, very deep belief that actually there tend to be two aims with Trump's tariffs. There's twofold, right? The first is to restore American industry, to protect their economy, and to stop globalization. Now, from the UK, we're not a manufacturing hub, right? We don't export many goods to the US, and we haven't really absorbed any jobs from the United States' deindustrialization. So the UK, we're mostly safe from this side of those tariffs from Trump, right? This also goes some way in explaining why we got off so lightly and pretty much better than any other country when it came to Trump's trade war. But the other main method of Trump's tariffs, or the reason he runs them, is as a method of applying pressure to other countries to further non-economic American priorities, right? We saw this with Canada and Mexico almost immediately when Trump came into power in 2025. He placed tariffs on them for not stopping fentanyl trafficking and not supporting America when they're trying to close the border and stop illegal immigration across the border. They didn't abide by him, they didn't agree with him, and so he put tariffs on their countries, on their economies, and they very quickly backed down. We saw a similar situation with Colombia, where Trump placed massive tariffs on Colombia for not accepting illegal immigrants who had, come into the United States illegally. They were trying to deport them back to Colombia, and Colombia just said no and wouldn't allow the planes to land. So Trump laid massive tariffs at the foot of the Colombian economy. They caved, and he got his political aims served through tariff means. Now, the UK right now could very easily find itself at risk and under threat from American tariffs because of the BBC's bias. And if this issue destroys that relationship between Trump and Starmer, the next round of tariffs that come, they're going to hit us far, far harder. And that means that British jobs, British incomes, British savings, British investments, it's all going to get hurt. Now, the one good side to this is that Starmer doesn't really have a good option here. Right? He is already on record defending the BBC, saying that they're not institutionally biased, where Trump is firm in his belief that they are, and he's going to sue them probably. If Starmer now turns around and denounces the BBC and changes his mind, the left wing of the Labour Party will attack him desperately. And actually, I think this will go beyond just the left wing of the Labour Party. Trump is actually very unpopular in the UK. And so, the only place where he isn't really unpopular is in the Reform Party. But amongst Tories and Lib Dems and Labour, and even people who aren't politically interested, most British people really do not like Trump. And so bowing down to him, letting him walk all over you, that's most likely going to be very damaging to your polling. So Starmer is unlikely to do that. But equally, if he doesn't bow down, if he doesn't give in to Trump, and if he doesn't side with him over the BBC and this election interference, then he risks losing what is really the only real success of his premiership, and the only successful thing is this relationship with Trump, which has led to some good results for us. So I really do believe this could be an existential threat for Starmer and the Labour Party. Personally, I'm quite glad to see it. I think the BBC, of course, is institutionally biased and corrupt, and this is great to have someone with the weight and stature and influence of Trump pouring fuel on that fire to try and fix this situation for us, in the process of obviously defending his name against this misinformation. Now, of course, if you want to tell me what video to cover or anything like that, leave a comment down below. I try to read them after every video. Or if you really want to help me build out this new politics channel where I'm trying to spread light and attention onto UK politics and move us in the right direction, share this video with a friend, a family member, a co-worker, someone else who needs to hear about this. This is the best way to help me grow the channel. Maybe in the future I'll even make some money out of this channel. I don't at the moment, so all of this is basically charity work that no one ever asked for. Over the last week, The Telegraph has been slowly releasing new information about the BBC and their biases from their internal BBC sources, and more recently, they released that entire full report exposing countless different examples of the BBC's bias, in particular in favour of the left-wing media and political establishment. Now, I went through all the